I'm Becca Smith, a solution architect here at NetGain. I'm a CPA and I started my career at Deloitte as a tax accountant. My legendary co-host, Chris Miller, is a NetSuite expert. He's our VP of product strategy here at NetGain, and he has over 6 years solutioning with some of NetSuite's largest enterprise clients. He's been a controller, CFO, director of finance, and many other roles. So let's jump in and tackle today's topic. Perfect. Well, we're so excited to have you here today, Brian. And Chris, as always, glad to have an SC Corner episode about a industry that is specific today. So we want to talk about cell towers. And Brian, would you like to introduce yourself and kind of where you come into this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So out here at NetGain, I'm the general manager of our lease product, specifically in NetSuite. So I'm thinking all things lessor and lessee, our products being NetLease and NetLessor. From, what can we do on sales, what's our go-to-market strategy, how are implementations going. And so one kind of avenue I've taken in that role is focusing on specific industries and saying, what do our products look like for this industry? Are there things we can do to help better align like a go-to-market strategy for NetSuite and for our products and make it industry specific?
Perfect. And then you've dug into like the cell tower industry.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually the first one I've really tried to sink our teeth into is cell towers. Okay,
perfect. So I guess kind of what I would love to get out of this episode today is some of your just knowledge about cell towers. Same with you, Chris. I know you've worked with them a lot. So just general industry knowledge of cell towers. If this comes up in a sales cycle, how should I be approaching this? What's a good use case inside of NetSuite? Why should the cell tower company go with NetSuite? And then also by extension, our products to create kind of a full package that fits their needs. So I guess just to start off, do you mind kind of going into just industry and how cell towers work as a whole?
I think it's helpful to kind of contextualize both where the industry is and what they care about most right now, right? So if I think about the cell tower companies, what we've seen with the ones we've talked about, they're in acquisition mode. So either they're acquiring other towers. We've seen recently joint acquisitions where 2 tower companies have come together to acquire other plots of land or other tower sites. So either acquisition or operational buildup. So they'll still build from the ground up sometimes too. But while they're in a growth mode, where I think kind of NetSuite comes in, and when we talk about financial operations and systems, is trying to help make that growth scalable, right? And so when we talk about scalable growth, that's the tagline we've been hitting on a lot, to be honest, with companies that we've talked to, is how can you make your systems efficient enough that can support all these acquisitions, all these companies? Because overall, if you look at kind of a map of the industry, if you will, there's a few big companies at the top. So if you think maybe cell tower company 1 to 4 take up a huge percentage of the towers in the country, then 5 to 10 take up another big chunk, and then you have about 80 other companies making up the rest. So there's a big, difference between those top 10 and the remainder. But there's still a decent amount of companies in that space.
Okay.
Yeah. Brian, how have you seen the replatforming to 5G affect this kind of activity?
I mean, I think that's just kind of helped drive the demand for towers in general, right? Because you have a need for new equipment. So you have a need for more tower space. Therefore, you have a need for more towers, right? And so there comes in this fight and this race for who can have the most towers and kind of help fuel more of that acquisition mentality, that building mentality. How can we get more towers? Because if we think about the business model too, right? A cell tower operator, if they're revenue positive on a tower, now they're just trying to rinse and repeat that as many times as possible.
So it's a lot of the same accounting. They're just trying to repeat this as much as they possibly can.
Yeah. And maybe one thing that's helpful to kind of hit on is what does that tower look like, right? So the way it was explained to me and what I thought was kind of helpful is, so either you've through an acquisition or through a build-up, you have a tower. But there's a couple different components to that. So first, there's the ground that they've had to lease. So that's where we come in, right? The ground lease. And so that company is the lessee. Right. And we would call that the tag or the phrase to use if you're on a demo is the ground lease. That'll be a very familiar term to them. So they have the ground lease. that's like picture farmland where they're leasing out a little, not even an acre, some like small plot of land,
Right.
That they'll build the tower on. Then they'll have
And some companies build the towers themselves, and I
Others
guess
are kinda
if they're leasing the
acquiring.
land, then they're probably building the tower, right?
Well, they could have acquired that tower. Someone would have built that tower.
Okay.
Yeah. But then their primary role is operating the tower.
Right.
So that's where you could get this mix where some companies are, and maybe you can speak to this too. What I've seen is some companies are building, but then most are acquiring existing towers.
Makes
and then
sense.
they may like retool what equipment's getting leased on them.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, though, that maybe a lot of people don't understand is that the cell phone tower company, there are things that are, so they get the ground from another, from the farmer, we'll say, and then the pole goes up. It could be a big monopole, it could be a small one. But what a lot of people don't understand is that the actual equipment that is attached to the tower, they don't own. So they essentially own land, concrete, and steel, and then the carriers come in and actually attach their equipment onto the tower, and they have
So
responsibility for maintaining
AT&T
their
or
equipment.
Verizon comes in, and they're the ones actually attaching the equipment.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the way it was explained to me that it kind of resonated was their business model is almost like a parking lot. And they're just charging for parking spaces. It's
Okay.
just on a cell phone tower.
But the cell phone towers are putting a car in the spot.
Exactly. Yeah.
Makes
yeah.
sense. Okay. And then I know, so I've been on cell tower deals before, and they tend to, I always thought of it as like layers on the cell tower, because you can put multiple companies on a single cell tower, right? So that's where the lessor side comes in on the accounting.
Exactly right. Yeah. Yeah. So a tower can be, and one kind of interesting, this was me digging in too deep to this industry, but so this whole cell tower concept actually started with the carriers. So back decades ago, the carriers themselves, the Verizons, the T-Mobiles, et cetera, were the ones that actually owned and operated all these towers. And then they kind of went through industry restructuring of each company kind of independently deciding if we focus on our core operations of providing network access, et cetera, let's strip away actual ownership operations of these towers.
That way we don't have
And-
to have three next to each other that every company owns.
Yeah, it was like an efficiency play, but then also just kind of them wanting to focus on their core business. And it almost spun up this entire industry on its own, where now you have all these independent tower operators that are then, to your point, leasing out that space on their tower to the different carriers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess, so with the tower kind of industry then, obviously we work in the NetSuite space. So what makes NetSuite like a good fit for these tower companies? I guess, Miller, do you want to speak to that one?
I think there are really 3 or 4 things that make it a really good fit. The first is kind of like as Brian's been talking about. There's a lot of complexity. So when you are a cell phone tower company, you're a real estate company because you're always out looking for sites that you can acquire. You're a construction company because even if you might acquire sites that already have it, but you still have to do the maintenance and manage it. And if not, you still have to go talk with the city and get it zoned because nobody wants a cell tower near that, so it gets really complex. Then you have to build the tower. Then you're into sales and leasing, looking for carriers to make sure that you got it. And then ultimately, then there's the idea that you got to have good customer service because you have to make all of these different stakeholders happy and know what's going on, from the landowner to neighbors to the carriers and all these things. So when you deal with a business where you have to have inventory, you're selling something that's intangible. You need to know on a real-time basis kind of what's going on with the activity. This is where NetSuite becomes an ideal platform to bring in information because you can do so many things vast in the suite. And to be honest, there are few off-the-shelf, if any, software that's like where someone woke up and said, I'm going to build a cell phone tower accounting system that can handle site management and do all these different pieces. And so NetSuite also becomes ideal because of the flexibility to flex it and build on the platform what's needed to really get these very industry-specific solutions. The other thing is, a lot of the cell phone tower companies, if you get large, you end up having a couple of other systems too. You'll have like a CRM system that you'll use to go around and look to acquire sites. Well, you need something you can integrate in with that very easily. So NetSuite's openness becomes really great for the CRM. You might need something to track the sites on a very specific basis, like a GIS system or something to track that, tracking hours of your people. And so integrations become really important, and that becomes something that becomes very easy to do. And then you really do need the mobility of being a cloud system. We often take that for granted, but this is one of those industries because you're going to have so many people actually out in the field doing things, scouting for land, building things. The ability to have all that communication becomes really, really important. And then I think the last thing that I would add to that for number 4 is this is a really regulated industry. There's a lot of regulations you have to follow, from state and local to environmental to, all these different things, and then complex legal contracts. The ability to build the controls into NetSuite is also something that's really helpful. Trying to do all of this on spreadsheets, people will do for the flexibility, but you end up with all of these bad data and controls and all of that. So that's another reason that getting this into a system like NetSuite makes a lot of sense.
Okay, yeah. I definitely see all of those pros making sense for like the cell tower industry. I guess just some key like industry specifics that I know I've seen. Obviously, like site profitability, wanting to make sure that these sites that they have are being profitable. We'll be able to look at like expenses and revenue, kind of comparing those. I guess, can you speak a little bit to that of like how that would work in the system?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, where one of the common things we hear from cell phone tower carriers is exactly that. I don't know if I'm making money on this site or not. And there's a couple of elements. The first, most obvious, are your carrier leases. Your revenue coming in, and everybody can see that. But then you have the acquisition costs for the site and the fixed assets. You have the maintenance costs that you come in. You have your people costs. And so being able to bring all those different data elements together, and if those are found in different systems, if you have your leases in one and your assets in another, your billing in another.
Now you can't combine the data.
Now you can't combine all the data and say, well, how am I doing on this site? And so that's problem number 1 when people come in. And that's also key for the scalable growth that Brian mentioned. There's no need to buy more sites if you're losing money on them. You got to figure out how to turn the sites you have around. And when people are, making great progress in unprofitable business, they look around and say, well, what happened here? And so that's the foundation, is how are we doing? And this becomes really important because as interest rates rise with inflation, working with lease all the time. Well, suddenly now the implicit rates are going up. The discount rates are going up.
It's changing your values.
Yeah, exactly. And so especially now, what is market rate? What is not market rate? As you go to renew and renegotiate these leases, profitability may be vastly different than it's been the last 10, 15 years when you had very predictable interest rates, and quite frankly, they were really low. So that's even more of an imperative now to make sure you really know how you're doing and able to see your cash flows.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and like something we've seen in the deals that we've had is just the reality that these companies have so many different systems that they're trying to, duct tape together to get like an understanding of site profitability that I think makes NetSuite, that's like a big selling point, I think, is just having everything either through an integration, right? Or just all in NetSuite, but ending up in one spot where I don't think they have that right now.
Right. Well, I know when I've demoed a cell towers, like a lot of times NetSuite does bring us in because we do the assets and the leases. And I always try to think of it as like a triangle. If you put the asset at the top of the triangle and then you're just attaching all the expenses and the revenues to it, that then gives you a asset that you can run an income statement by. And that's how you're then able to get the site profitability. I've also seen it really commonly done with like the locations inside of NetSuite, like being able to use the location field to then designate a site for each location, and then you can run all of your reports by location, which is a native NetSuite functionality, so it's going to be super seamless.
That makes a lot of sense.
I feel like just kind of piggybacking off of what you said, like the actual application of how I would demo to a site, like a client would be probably using one of those options.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that comes in too, Becca, is really those operational pieces. So you'll have a lot of field people. They don't care about the lease or that, but they do care how tall is my tower.
Yeah. How many spaces do I have?
How many containers, spaces do I have? Do I need to let the owner know that someone's coming because they let the cows out if they leave the gate open? There's a lot of those things that become just as important as the accounting to actually run the tower. Do I have an HOA that needs to know or has a first lien on the property and an HOA fee has to be paid? And so all of that kind of stuff is also where NetSuite is really strong, because when we're building kind of the site ID, there are a lot of systems that thought that you would have assets and then join them and have this idea of a site and bring in things like tower height and the gate code for the key for the cows and the HOA phone number. That isn't even possible. And so the ability to build all of that is what makes it really good. That ability to marry the operational with the financial becomes really transformative for a lot of these companies, because we hear that they've got data living. They really have data living in silos. They might be running QuickBooks, for example, just because it seems easy. Then they got a leasing system, and then they got a site tracking system, they got a project management system, and we can bring all of that together in a way that everybody can use it.
Yeah, I feel like this is also a really good example of like if you're demoing to a client that is in this space, like a cell tower company, then you should be putting those fields in there. You should be putting in tower height. You should be putting in like number of cells, and so that way, like as a cell tower company, I can go in and visualize exactly how I'm using NetSuite.
That's right.
So just wanted to call
that out.
Yeah,
I like how you actually did that in our most recent demo, where you showed like I might be saying the wrong term, but like a geotag, where it pulled up that exact site and you saw it was, I think it was a good touch to showing exactly what it could look like for someone if that's a part of what they care about, is the true physical location, not just site 115,
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that one was just accessing the Google Earth API. So that you could come and see, because a lot of stuff actually happens off Google Earth. People will measure what's the distance, you'll get people being, what's a setback from the nearest building if I want to build something new. And they don't usually, a lot of times people don't go out there locally anymore because it might be remote. And you're actually doing those
making decisions just based off of a map.
Based off Google Earth and what you're going to do.
That's funny.
Love that. So I think that is like a really key metric, obviously, for cell towers, like site profitability, having the right metrics and having that set up correctly inside of NetSuite. Another one would then be like the automated billing and invoicing, just kind of the whole scalability piece. So we kind of talked about that, but I guess specifically inside of NetSuite, I feel like obviously all of our products will do like auto billing, auto invoicing, which makes sure that you're not missing any of these key dates with your clients of like, obviously, if you're a company, you want to make sure you're getting paid. So maybe talking a little bit to like that. I also know that we have like our product specifically have AI abstraction now. So maybe Brian, if you wanted to talk a little bit to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So that's one thing we've found is that, like, if you picture a cell tower company, right, if they're expanding their number of towers pretty significantly, you're going to have those ground leases, right? Like we talked about, they're leasing from farmers, et cetera, where they're all going to look different. And because they're on the ground lease side, need to have a very detailed abstraction to ASC 842, right? And so that means I need somebody physically reading through this document. It's not going to be all the same, like maybe more so on the tenant side, right, where we have more, like we can kind of control what those contracts look like. Here it's going to be different for every single one. And if we're expanding our tower sites a lot, that's going to be a ton of manual work for someone. And so one thing that we have in our NetLease product now is an AI lease assistant, where it's going to take that first spin for you. The two cool features I really love about that tool, first, and this is something when we were developing it, we actually didn't even think was going to be that impactful. But when we started using it, we really liked it, which is highlighting. And so what it'll do is we've kind of taught it, here are the sections that matter most for ASC 842, and highlight those parts of the lease. Like, yes, abstract it. Yes, populate the lease record with this information, but don't only do that. Also highlight the sections you're looking at or highlight related sections.
I didn't realize the product did that. That's
Yeah.
actually super
Yeah,
helpful
yeah.
because more than anything, if I'm abstracting information, I didn't want to go verify it's correct.
What it's there, exactly.
And like you
yeah.
can go and see the highlighted pieces and then easily be able to verify it.
Yeah, and like one other thing with that we added in is you could call it a control, I guess. That's with the accounting brain going there. But we have it highlight any dollar value, just as another check of, okay, we're still new into this AI space. And so, yes, we've taught it to go look specifically for lease payments. But if there's other payments associated, we want it to make sure when you're reviewing, you're seeing any place that there's actual like cash movement. So it's going to highlight like any dollar amount, for example, just so you can see and help like think through the completeness of that abstraction.
A good example there, I was doing, actually as a project Brian and I were doing, and I took a lease from the city of Naples, Florida for their ground lease that they were leasing. And it's exactly that. The face of the payments were there, but buried within that thing were a couple of payment amounts of, in this example, every time they put a container on the pole, they were due an extra $500 a month starting on that per container. And so you would need to know that and actually be able to be looking for that, or you're going to find you got this big audit true up. Same thing, every time they added a carrier lease, they were due an additional $500 on the ground lease as well. And that was really just a sentence in there. It's not part of the schedule. It's considered like an optional payment or even a non-lease payment afterwards. But crucial to pick up, and that's where that AI finds that by highlighting any dollar value. As you could see $500, and now you can make sure you're in compliance with the lease covenants.
Very cool. Okay, I feel like just as an SC, if I'm an SC demoing to like a cell tower company, we've used a whole bunch of terms. So I just want to make sure that I think it might be helpful to go through and just clarify what those are. Obviously, we talked about ground leases. That's going to be the lease that we are renting for the land.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's going to be where the tower goes. And then we have containers. Containers are like a physical thing that goes on the cell tower itself that then the companies are coming and putting equipment in.
That's correct. So it can take a lot of different forms, but think of exactly that. There needs to be a place for me to bolt on my microwave towers and radio antennas and all of that. And so when you look at a tower, you kind of see where there's like these pods of things. It's not like all over, but it tends to be, one of those triangle ones. It's got three sides. Those are what you would consider the containers. So that's where a different carrier can put in each of their equipment for that. So you might have 3 or 4 carriers, then you'll have like your local 911. They get like a free spot to do their stuff and things like that.
Okay, cool. Are there any other terms that you feel like are specific to the industry that like would be helpful?
I mean, not necessarily specific to the industry, but just so you're having the right terminology. So when they're leasing out that space, that would be the tenant lease is what we see it called most often.
Okay.
And then one other term that, because they're a REIT, or most of these are REITs, they'll have, and we can get to this later, but they'll have adjusting entries sometimes away from like the standard GAAP entries. And that what I've seen most often is they call that a funds from operations metric. And that's like a REIT specific term for reporting that they have to do as being a REIT.
Is that most commonly seen using multi-book inside of NetSuite?
I actually haven't seen it being used multi-book.
Okay,
We've
it's just
done
like a
custom
end of term
reclass
like
schedules.
adjustment that they're doing reclasses.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. A couple of other terms, like the way they use it, you'll hear them use inventory and assets a lot of times. And they won't necessarily always be used the way we think of it. So assets tend to be the carrier equipment that they don't own. So they want to know what assets are on the pole, and their inventory are the sites and the poles and the concrete. So that's kind of like one distinction, is to make sure. You may find that they want to track a lot of assets, if you will, but they don't own them, but they just need to know what's out there, what antennas are out there, what dishes, what do we have. versus the pole or the foundation or the building or the power that they own and they're actually depreciating and managing. So that's one that I think is important. Let me think here. The other thing that I think would be helpful is just understanding kind of the overall process. So,
which that's like I lease land, I have a tower, and
Yep.
then I'm lessor, like leasing out different parts of that tower.
Yep.
And that's like, that is their revenue stream.
Correct.
Yeah. That's exactly right. You look to acquire the land, then you might build, or it might have it on there. Then you look to, then a lot of times you have to deal, even when it changes hands, you have to deal with some sort of entitlements or permitting and all of that. And then what you'll do is exactly that. You'll look for tenant leases to do that. And then you'll manage the billing. And then hopefully it goes a long time like that. You'll end up doing a fair amount of maintenance. So that's another thing that gets done.
Okay.
So we have customers, depending on their level of sophistication, we'll do the maintenance and just kind of track it with with one of our records, all the way to having a full-blown, field services app if they need to go and dispatch people to
Just
a lot
depending
of
on how
local towers.
complex and probably how many towers they're maintaining.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then one that doesn't get talked a lot about, but that kind of just comes along, are asset retirement obligations. You have to actually track. At some point, everyone's going to have to tear down the towers.
Right.
And especially these really big ones, we may find that changes as 5G comes, because 5G runs on the top of light poles or on the top of
I didn't realize
really
that. So
small
5G
things.
towers don't have to be on a cell tower necessarily.
Not at all. In fact,
I didn't realize that.
it's much more powerful, but the range in which it works is much smaller.
Oh, I didn't know that either.
So as you drive through a neighborhood, for example,
you have to have it on one of your little towers.
You'll see light poles having these different 5Gs, and that's kind of why they're building it out. So you may find that there will be in the coming years, there could be a lot of these larger towers retired. It's going to be a while, but 3G is now gone. That's been retired.
Completely.
As 4G and LTE start to get retired, it will essentially now run off these much smaller towers. And so asset retirement obligations, tracking that's another thing that if you have to have that, can become important.
That is very interesting. I didn't, just from my knowledge using a cell phone, wondered how that worked.
Yeah, there's a lot you'll see where they make them look like trees now.
I've seen those.
Yeah,
There's
I
one
have
near
seen
my
those.
neighborhood. That's like a very obviously fake tree.
They're trying to disguise it.
But it's interesting because that's where you see those little things sticking off of roofs that look like little short antennas, or those 3-foot extensions on a light pole. Those are 5G towers.
And I'll be honest, I don't know how pervasive it is in the industry, but I did see just recently on a company that we're meeting with soon that one of their core business models is those building leases. Like rather than what we've been talking about, which is ground lease, build tower, lease out. It's these ones that we see on tops of buildings or
and that's
on
probably a slightly
pole.
different.
It's probably a little bit
then.
different. We actually haven't gotten into them with it yet, so I'm not sure how from how to use NetSuite. I don't know that it'll end up shaping out to be that much
right, because you're
different,
probably still leasing. You're just now leasing from a company or a person who owns the building that you're then going to put your little tower on.
Yeah.
And then you're still then probably lessor leasing that out to the company.
But I kind of found it interesting that they were pretty explicit that, we do building towers, or that's what they focus on.
Yeah. Okay. Good to know that's out there, and
yes,
to be aware of if that comes
that
up, it's
it's
not an unknown use case.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, I feel like if I were to have to demo to a cell tower, I would know what I was talking about. So that is what I hope to get out of this
good.
chat today. Was there anything else that you guys wanted to specifically about cell towers that you thought would be helpful, either with our products or NetSuite?
I'll say, so one thing that we've built out for one of our existing customers that has been a big win for them is true-up modifications.
Yes.
But have we talked about that before on this podcast? Because I don't
No,
want
we
to necessarily
haven't.
hit. Okay. So just so not specific to cell tower, right? That functionality isn't only useful for cell towers. But
Right.
broadly speaking, what that functionality does, so let me give an example, because this happens a lot. What it sounds like in the cell tower industry is that, right, sales goes out, acquires a bunch of new towers, and then they're in negotiations. And those negotiations, one of two things could happen, right? Either sales wraps a negotiation, doesn't pass along that information to accounting, or they're in active negotiation and whatever they agree to is backdated to some specific date in the past.
And anytime you have anything backdated in NetSuite, like you cause a problem because you close periods in NetSuite.
Exactly. And so what this company was struggling with was exactly that, is what do we do when we have these lease records? This would be on the tenant lease side most often, where we're having to go either back to prior periods. So either we have to open up prior periods and we have to make accounting changes, go back forward, or we have to kind of have the side lease that we're like migrating information to, right? Because you're going from one track to another if they were like made a contract change in negotiation.
Right.
And so the true-up modification functionality that we've added to both NetLease and NetLessor kind of fix this problem. So what it would do is it would let you backdate a change. So if I said, hey, my rent went up by $1,000 a month, I can say that didn't happen this month, that happened 6 months ago, but I only want the accounting change this month. So true up what that needed to be. Well, it's an extra
if it had
$6,000.
happened 6 months ago, there's now, an adjustment that needs to be made, and I want the cumulative dollar impact of that adjustment to happen in the current month.
Today, yep, exactly. And then it would be that true up to the right of use asset lease liability, or depending on how their accounting is structured. But yeah, truing up all the accounting this period and then going forward.
Yeah, that feature is like one of the most requested things, like coming from just, and also just a little clarification, obviously, for anyone listening to the podcast, like NetLease, NetLessor, obviously our products. And this is a function that has been like widely asked for. So it's actually fantastic that now it's available.
It's been a big win. Yeah, I've heard a lot of requests for it. Yeah.
Yes. So, and it is a specific use case that cell towers, or really just any company that has leasing as their main revenue stream, they tend to see this because sales usually has a delay in talking to accounting.
Yeah, exactly.
So, we're very glad that that's around.
Yes, yeah. And then one, just because I mentioned it earlier but didn't kind of bring it back up. So we mentioned that like non-GAAP adjustment. So just to touch on that for a second. So that is that fund from operations metric that they follow, where if you think about a lease where, let's say we have a 5-year lease, they're straight lining revenue over 5 years would be the GAAP way to do it. In the REIT space, what they need to do is annual straight lines. So that's what that funds from operations is saying, in this year, what would our funds be? And so you'd straight line whatever that total cash is over those 12 months. And so what we've done for companies, and this is more of a custom build, but a custom reclass schedule.
Yeah.
So I guess rather than multi-book, but I wonder if multi-book could do it. But
it's actually
make
probably
that
better. My
adjustment.
guess is they would want it in the current book that they're operating in,
fair,
because
okay.
they don't report on GAAP in that scenario, right?
Yeah,
So they
correct.
don't necessarily want it on the GAAP. They want it on this specific
Yeah, they're
industry
actually like
standard.
making a change over to this funds from
Yeah.
operations metric. Yeah.
Yeah, so they would want it in the normal one. But the custom reclass would definitely work. So that makes sense.
Yeah, nice.
Very cool. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us today, Brian. I felt like
Yeah.
this was very helpful.
Yeah.
And hopefully, like if someone has to demo to sell towers now, they have the industry information, they know what terms they should be using, kind of the best way to set it up inside of NetSuite, and hopefully they reach out to us. So
Absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. This is
Yeah,
fun.
it's been
Thanks.
great. I would just leave with anyone who has this coming up. It seems very complex when you first do it with all these different moving parts, and a lot of things that have not in the past tended to be NetSuite's sweet spot, with real estate and leasing. But now that all this is put together, there's a very strong package. So if you're an SC tasked with this, if you're an AE, these are things that you now can feel very confident
approaching and then
approaching and
giving the solution.
Yep, and being like, yep, I know you're very complex, and we've got the solutions to handle that.
love it. All right, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Becca Smith, and I've been joined by Chris Miller. Thanks so much for listening to SE Corner. You can find us on any of your preferred streaming platforms, and you can always look up our products at netgain.tech.